Okay, in this video we're going to talk about the cephalosporins, and we're going to make the material really memorable. And we're going to talk about it in this mansion over here. This mansion is going to remind us of the cephalosporins, and we'll explain why. We're going to have each different floor represent a different generation of the cephalosporins. So if you can imagine yourself experiencing this mansion, you're going to know just about everything you need to know about the cephalosporins. So let's just have a brief introduction on the cephalosporins. So the cephalosporins are beta-lactam drugs that inhibit cell wall synthesis. Other beta-lactam drugs include the penicillins and the monobactams, but what makes the cephalosporins different are the fact that they are less susceptible to penicillinases. That's why we see over here these pencils coming but not doing anything, because the cephalosporins are less susceptible to penicillinases. Okay, now let's talk about each of these generations. So again, we're going to start with the top floor, and that's going to represent the first generation cephalosporins. The second floor is going to represent the second generation, and so on. So let's take a look. Wow, what's going on over here? We'll discuss the police car in a second, but first let's look at these cell phones. There are these cell phones on the wall over here. One has a picture of Zorro, and one has a picture of a guy flexing. Cell phone Zorro is going to remind us of cefazolin, which is first generation cephalosporin injection, and the guy flexing is going to remind us of the cell phone flexing for cefaflexin, also known as Caflex under its trade name, which is oral. You might have noticed this staff of Oreos over here. The staff of Oreos is going to remind us of Staph aureus. Cefazolin specifically is used prior to surgery to prevent Staph aureus wound infections. Let's take a look over here. So here we see this police car, and there's this bacteria on the mirror over here. Police mirror for Proteus mirabilis. This guy showed up in our Proteus mirabilis video. And on top over here, we see the Coca-Cola for E. coli, which is also a gram-negative rod. And we also see these clubs here for Klebsiella pneumonia. You might have noticed that these things are going through to the second floor, because second generation cephalosporins are also effective against these microbes. But before we get to the second floor, we just want to make mention of these gram-positive cocci in the window. Cephalosporins of the first generation are also effective against gram-positive cocci. Okay, let's go to the second floor. Okay, what do second generation cephalosporins include? Let's take a look at this cell phone over here. Here we see a cell phone over here with a fox, cell phone fox, for cefoxitin. But this fox is very fat, for cefaclor, and he's also got a lot of fur, for cefuroxime. Okay, we'll give him some tea, for cefotitin. So this reminds us that second generation cephalosporins include cefaclor, cefoxitin, cefuroxime, and cefotitin. What is it effective against? So as we mentioned, Proteus mirabilis, E. coli, and Klebsiella. And we also note in the window these gram-positive cocci again. But the second floor has something more. It has these hens that are pecking. Hens pecking reminds us of a famous mnemonic, the microbes which the second generation cephalosporins cover. And what are these? H for Haemophilus influenza, E for Enterobacter aerogenes, N for Neisseria species, and S for Serratia, and PEK for what we mentioned already, Proteus mirabilis, E. coli, and Klebsiella. Alright, let's go to third generation. Oh, my favorite, the third floor of the building here. The third generation cephalosporins includes cephtaxime, represented by the taxi over here that's coming out of the cell phone taxi. The triax, or the three axes for ceftriaxone, and the taffy over here for ceftazidime. What are the third generations effective against? So over here, we see this really serious gram-negative guy over here. Third generation cephalosporins are effective against serious gram-negative infections, which are resistant to other beta-lactams. Let's take a look at this string that's coming out of the ceftriaxone. This reminds us of three things which ceftriaxone is effective against. First, we see the GON, which reminds us of gonorrhea. We see the brain on fire for meningitis, and we see the lima beans for Lyme disease. Ceftriaxone is effective in treating meningitis and gonorrhea and disseminated Lyme disease caused by various microbes. And finally, we see this guy, Suit Man with Money. This is the Suit Man with Money, which showed up in our Pseudomonas video. Ceftazidime is effective against Pseudomonas. Okay, let's go to fourth generation. So here we see the cell phone that's peeing, which reminds us that the fourth generation includes cefapime, and it's effective against gram-positive organisms, as we see these gram-positive guys over here, but also gram-negative organisms, with activity against Pseudomonas. And that's why this cell phone is also exploding the Suit Man with Money, Pseudomonas. Okay, let's go to fifth generation. Whoa, there's Mars. That's Mars over there. Before we get to Mars, let's explain what the fifth generation cephalosporins include. Here we see the trampoline over here that the cell phone is jumping on, the cell phone trampoline for ceftaroline. 5th generation cephalosporins include broad gram-positive and gram-negative organism coverage, and that's why we see all these gram-positive and gram-negative organisms here. Unlike the 1st to 4th generation, ceftaroline covers MRSA, Mars for MRSA over here, and that's why we have Mars over here. We also have the enter sign on it to help us remember that they're also effective against Enterococcus faecalis. But you might have noticed that the pseudomania does not come down here because they do not cover Pseudomonas. So let's talk about the adverse effects of the cephalosporins, and for that, we're going to go behind this mansion over here. So here we have this guy over here who wasn't invited to the mansion, and he's going to remind us of the different adverse effects of the cephalosporins. So he of course is very sensitive. He's very sensitive about it. He's hypersensitive. Hypersensitivity reactions are one of the adverse effects of the cephalosporins. He's also very sad over here because his red blood cells exploded. This reminds us of the anemia, the autoimmune hemolytic anemia that's associated with cephalosporin use. He was so depressed that he drank this beer, but he couldn't get anything out because the dye was stuck. The dye was stuck for disulfiram-like reaction. This reaction is seen in people who drink alcohol after cephalosporin use. That's why we have the beer here. He's also really sad because his K over here, his favorite K block, got destroyed. The knife went through it, which reminds us of the vitamin K deficiency. Cephalosporin use depletes the normal flora of the gut, which play a role in the activation of vitamin K, so cephalosporin use can result in vitamin K deficiency. And finally, this guy over here, the mean guy that glides. The mean guy that glides for aminoglycosides. Aminoglycosides with cephalosporin could have nephrotoxic effects, and that's why he has this Nerf gun over here to remind us of the nephrotoxic effects of aminoglycosides with cephalosporins. In order to make this scene super complete, we'll just make a note about mechanism of resistance. So cephalosporins are inactivated by cephalosporinases, a type of beta-lactamase. Also, structural changes in penicillin binding proteins can lead to resistance. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for our next video in pharmacology.